Some time ago, the staff and I went to lunch in Atlantic Station. We were in Dan Johnson's big Suburban, thankfully, by the way, because when we got to the 17th Street Bridge at the stoplight, and we were having gentle conversation, we were interrupted with a non-gentle rear ending. Out of nowhere. We didn't expect the person driving to be driving around 40 miles an hour. It deployed her own airbag. Isn't it weird to be caught off guard like that? To be sitting in a space, having a friendly conversation, and then just to be blindsided. There's that weird space between getting hit, the pre-talk, the hit, and the post-talk where you find out everyone's okay, of just trying to figure out how to process in those brief moments what exactly happened to you. It doesn't always feel good to be caught off guard, blindsided, or in any other way. I would suggest that for a lot of us, it doesn't even feel that great to miss something go by us that's good because we failed to anticipate it, because we failed to take notice of all the wonderful things around us. Still, in that case, we would miss out too. My suggestion is that we look at this text anew today. The triumphal entry, at least in Mark's gospel, is one where many people miss it because they're not anticipating properly or expecting rightly, and so some of the power goes right by. According to the great late Fred Craddock, reading about the triumphal entry as it has come known to us in St. Mark's gospel is a difficult thing because of all the pageantry of the Christian tradition. If you have familiarity with this church, you know that every year on this Sunday, we do a little drama with Christ and the disciples, and we end the service with shouts of Hosanna and palms, and hopefully, if the rain has stopped, I've asked Sister Jean to pray to God for that, by the way, that we will close down spring and we'll have a processional parade, and there will be a donkey. The only thing worse smelling than a donkey is a wet donkey. And we'll have a donkey, and we'll go down to the back of our church for a Mediterranean lunch, and it's festive, and it's fun, and it's great. But that's not the first time the church, or any church, has come up with a tradition of pageantry around Palm Sunday. This triumphant moment in the life of Christ has been celebrated in many different ways over Christian history. And what Craddock is saying is this: because we've seen it, and we've heard it taught, and we've exclaimed Hosanna ourselves, and most likely if you're here, you wave palm branches one time or another too. Because of all that, it's hard to reread it in Mark's gospel with fresh eyes. We read all of that exuberance into our text, but the truth is, St. Mark's text is far less triumphant than, say, St. Matthew's telling of the story. And let's not forget another thing. We read such a story with the ability to have dramatic irony in our minds. We know that as Jesus enters into Jerusalem, later in that week awaits him a cross, and then a tomb, and then resurrection. But at this point in the story, no one else seems to know what really awaits. So in Mark's gospel, it's a bit more peculiar. Jesus is the one who is to be the Messiah. This is Jesus' own self-understanding. He is the royal, Davidic Messiah, the king of God's kingdom. And here he is at the time of year when he and his kinfolk would pilgrimage to the great holy city to celebrate the great holy feast, Passover. The central story in the Hebrew worldview, this event that they celebrate every year. So friends, getting on a colt, having people wave branches and shout, Hosanna, save us, is nothing short than a return of the king moment. You see, for God's people, there was not a throne that was occupied by the royal, chosen Davidic king. No. There were puppet kings and tyrant overlords. And the people of God, even though they were in their homeland, were so oppressed, they felt still in exile. And it's in that moment that the royal, Davidic Messiah, the king, is to return home and to restore God's ways again to the land. Return of the king indeed. It reminds me of when Aragorn mounts up and returns to the City of Men in Lord of the Rings, or probably more germane to your thinking, when King Richard the Lionheart comes back from the Crusades only to find that nasty Prince John on the throne. No, the new king, the real king, is back. He's bringing justice with him. Now, Fred Craddock says something interesting. He says that this is really a once-in-a-lifetime experience for those journeying with Jesus. But the text, as it goes, doesn't seem to suggest that anyone knows that. It's not just that they're pilgrimaging to a holy spot for their big meal with their families. They did that every year, but here's the thing. They're pilgrimaging with the King, the Messiah. And nobody seems to know. They're not prepared for it. The moment is a bit more than they realized. Have you ever missed the moment? I remember sitting in my study counseling a young couple who was to be married, and I tell every couple this. I always say, your wedding day will be the fastest day of your life. You need to stop and drink it in. Every now and again, just stop and just look around and just say, this is my wedding day. Because if you don't, it will go by so quickly. So this one couple that I shared that with, I had high hopes for them, but then I came in to do the ceremony, and as I came into the narthex, I saw a furor going on there. The bride's face was bright red. She was hollering at her mom, and then her bridesmaid, and then the wedding coordinator. Something wasn't right. I don't know. Whenever I see that, I run to my office. Shut the door and lock it. I come out 2 minutes before the wedding. Her face seemed to get the appropriate color as she got to the altar. Things were calm. We were able to go through the vows and promises and the rings, and then I thought, that was just nerves. But later, right after the wedding, the bride and groom and the bridal party come in here and they take a photo down here with the minister, and I could hear it. The anxiety rising. We're not on schedule. This isn't right. That's not right. So on and so forth. And her face red. So whenever they took our photos together, I said, have a great reception. See you later. And I ran. But because Jesus tells me to love and reach out, I reached out 2 months later, and I asked the couple to come. I wanted to do a follow-up, and I just said, well, how did it go at the reception? And she turned downcast and said, I missed it. I just completely missed it. I had to see other people's photos and videos because I wasn't there, because I was focusing on all the wrong things. I bet that the people who were with Jesus got settled into what was considered mundane and normal and missed who they were with. And it makes a lot of sense. The Jewish people of the day had been hopeful about the Messiah a lot, and their hopes had been dashed upon rocks. 2 centuries prior to this event, we can remember of Judas Maccabeus as he led a revolt against Rome. He rode into Jerusalem on a colt, and people shouted, save us, and waved green leafy foliage. And his ride into Jerusalem ended at the temple, where he walked in and did what we call a cleansing, where he ripped down all the pagan and idolatrous images from the temple, casting them out. People thought, too, he could be king. He could be Messiah. So maybe the diminutive way that people are following Jesus, saying Hosanna and waving a few things, it's nice, but not as nice as Matthew's telling. Maybe it's because they're celebrating a dream deferred, a hope yet to come. They're celebrating an effigy, really, of something they hope will happen someday. Maybe theirs is not about a hope present. The thing is waiting, if we're honest, can dull our senses. When we wait, we lose our alertness. Sometimes we fall asleep. I was picking up Marcella from piano lessons. As I walked in, I saw something rather funny. I saw a young boy with a piano book standing over his dad, and his dad was slumped over on the couch, passed out, and he was just eerily staring at his father. I put two and two together. While the boy was in piano lessons, Dad grew tired of waiting and fell asleep. And so he missed something wonderful. He missed his son. I helped his son wake up his dad. I think he was scared to wake up Dad. But hey, I could wake him up and move on. Craddock reminds us that there is dramatic irony to all of this, that no matter what the crowds are thinking, no matter what the disciples are thinking, we, you and me, the readers, we know what's going on. We know that Jesus, as he's riding on a colt, is celebrating a political action. He's on a protest march. And ironically, at the same time, he is walking his funeral procession. Let's talk about protest. Have you ever participated in a protest march? They're interesting things. Everything has meaning in a protest march. When I was a freshman in college, I went back to my high school football game, and it was the inter-city game. We had two inter-city rivals, and when we had our inter-city game, the game time started not at 7, but at 5:45 because it was dangerous. And so we started at 5:45, and a huge gang brawl happened on the opposing side of the field. And the gang brawl went out into the field, and players were involved in it, and it was very violent and terrifying. If you guys remember the fall of 1999 in media, well, this made national news all over the place. Because all the kids got sent to alternative school, kicked out of the traditional school, and Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Push Coalition descended upon Decatur, Illinois, and made it a civil rights issue. Well, whenever that happens, there's another group of people that seems to come protest the Rainbow Push Coalition movement, and that was a white supremacist organization. And then there were a whole lot of people who were siding with the school board on their decision, and so they decided to protest too. So on Sunday, my dad and I were called by a widow in our church to help move some heavy stuff out of her attic, and so we set to drive the 15-minute drive across town, which took more like an hour and a half. Because in a city of about 80,000 people, 3 ginormous marches were happening simultaneously. It was interesting to drive through each crowd and to see who was protesting and why. They waved banners that told us what they were about. Jesus is coming into Jerusalem in protest. He rides on a colt and people shout Hosanna and they wave palms. It has all the trappings of royalty. And what was he protesting? Well, all along Mark's gospel, Jesus has been upset over the strict nature of the law that prohibited people from sensing grace. Jesus is protesting continuously acts of anger and violence and power from some upon others. Jesus, very simply, protests all the wayward ways of the world. He wants to bring God with him. Now, this is protest march and his funeral procession. It really ends for Jesus in the temple. But oddly, in Mark's telling, it's so anticlimactic. He walks into the temple, the place where people are supposed to go during Passover, and he looks around. He doesn't see very many people there. It's kind of quiet, which is a strange thing given the time of the year and the season. This is the time when, like the mall at Christmas, it would be packed and bustling and busy, but Jesus comes in and sees nothing. It's almost as if the people were not expecting the king. It's almost as if the people had no idea the king was coming. And so Jesus says, I'll come protest tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, he'll go in there and turn tables. He will chase out money changers for making the church a place of marketing. He will get upset with people for continuing to keep foreigners and people who were not Jewish away from God. He'll do that tomorrow. Clearly, they didn't expect him on this night. For me, as I read this season, there is an allegory here for the Christian life. It's this. I think that we can get so bored or simply so tired of waiting for Christ's return that when Christ's presence does show up in a protest or at a party or in a church service, we may miss it. Or when Christ's presence is on display in some celebration, we don't note it for the divine grace that it is. We just think it's a bit of lucky fun. The Lord knows also that we do teach that the King, Christ, will return once again. Some people call this the second coming. I think some Christians are a little too anxious about this teaching. I think other Christians are embarrassed by it. Make no mistake about it, we believe that Christ will come again and make all things new. I just wonder, will we be ready to shout Hosanna? Will our eyes be open enough to say, Hosanna in the highest? Or will we miss it because we're home watching football